Hey everyone, my name is Hannah. I'm one of the two co-founders of Barristan Essentials, and today I want to talk to you about my knitting machine. So this is a Titexma TH160 and a ribber, and it's a mid-gauge 6mm machine. So we use it to make a lot of our hats for our knitting business. And I've been getting asked about how we do this lovely 4-corner crown decrease on our hats, not unlike the one that I'm wearing. So I thought I would show you how we do that. So to get started, I always try to pull out all of my yarn that I'm gonna need. And since this is a mid-gauge, it's a little harder to find yarn here in the US that is already on a cone. So you typically have to wind it up either from a hank or from something that you would get in the store. And the reason I like having a cake, is so that you can pull from the center, and that gives you a nice smooth tension when you wind it up through this thing. So this little grasshopper antenna looking thing is the first piece to getting started. So mine's a little bent just because I've been a little hard on it in terms of wear and tear, so you can see how it kind of leans that way. So you push it through like that, and you thread it through all the different loops, and you have wax on there. So once you thread it, once you get that, that's kind of how it looks for the first color. And so this is for the brim. So we like to do a double fold over brim. That's about 5 inches total in length. I think you have to kind of find your preference for what kind of a brim you like. Some people don't like the fold over brim, but all of the hats that we sell and the patterns we design have this nice little extra layer of warmth. We live in Montana and it's currently 20 degrees outside, and that's the high, so you really need as much warmth as you can get. So to get started, what I do, and since we do a lot of bulk orders, I've made it easier on myself by actually marking the 2 spans of the needles. So for a hat it's gonna be a worsted weight hat, you typically cast on like 88 stitches. And so when you're on a flatbed machine, you want to have 2 extra stitches so that when you seam it up using mattress stitch, which I can show you in another video, you'll have that same number. So you would count out 90 instead of 88. So since I pre-marked it here and here with a little R for regular, I know how many I need to pull out from non-working position, which is A, to E, which is how I will cast on. And then I'll show you how to put them into working position with this little carriage. So for worsted weight yarn, I recommend swatching everything. I've already swatched for this particular yarn, which is Lion Brand Woolies, which you can get pretty much anywhere at like a Joann's or a Michael's, or if you live in Narnia like I do, you can order it online. And so the tension for the ribber, I put at a 6. So I always leave a little bit of a tail for when I want to seam it up, and then I do a loop like that I can tighten and put on the first needle. Everyone has their preferences. I like to do the E-wrap cast on, so it's literally just making the letter E. So here's a little bit of a closer view of the double E-wrap cast on, and it can feel a little like the learning curve. I noticed, sorry, my dog is currently smelling everything in the knitting room. She's gonna probably make a cameo somewhere in the background. But so I've been hand knitting since I was 6, and I'm 35 right now. And the thing about hand knitting is I feel like when you make a mistake, there is a learning curve to that, but you don't have to quite pull out as much typically, especially once you get better at troubleshooting. And with machine knitting, I noticed that the learning curve was really steep, and there are still some days where I feel like the machine is working me instead of me working on the machine. And my tendency whenever I screw up, like, yeah, I can usually pull it out a little bit, but if it's something where I've given the wrong tension or I've just not been paying attention, like the second you're not focused, you can make the carriage jump. I find that it's sometimes easier to just pull it out and start over. Some people use lifelines, and I can talk about that in another video, but I do think that's one of the biggest differences. You know, I love both hand and machine knitting. For our business, we like to do a lot of hats in bulk orders for local nonprofits. And so after a certain point, we started our business a few years ago during the pandemic, because I actually taught my partner how to knit, and he's a software engineer, so he's really good at a lot of the pattern design, and he's picked it up faster than anybody I've ever taught how to knit, which it's funny to me that he's so darn good at it, and I've been doing it for so many years, and he quickly surpassed my skill set. So maybe I'm a good sensei, or maybe he's just really naturally gifted, but regardless, we were doing a lot of hand knitting for friends and family, and when the pandemic hit, we decided to start selling on Etsy. You know, it's a great little gateway. And then now we have a Shopify, and we have partnerships with a lot of nonprofits, but what that meant was our wrists and our hands were really hurting, and we didn't want to damage our love of knitting, but we still wanted to make stuff for people by hand. And machines like this one, this is a Taiwanese machine that's actually modeled. This is a MidGauge, and you have a few different gauges of machines. This one is actually modeled after a Brother Cage 230, which is a bulky machine, but this is a mid-gauge. So bulky is 9mm, so I can talk about gauges and stuff on another video, but to show you what I just did, I threaded, once I got to the end, here, let me tilt the video, the carriage and the sinker plate are on, so I put the yarn into the carriage, and then now that it's casted on, I do the first on through. So it's kind of being sticky today for some reason, which I'm not sure why. Usually it runs a little better, and I just oiled it, so not sure. And then you need to put weights on it. This was one of the most interesting things for me to kind of wrap my head around, is when you work on a knitting machine, part of what keeps the yarn in place on the needles is weight. And so you need to have things like this. I really recommend you be careful when you hang these on here, because of the fact that if they fall on your foot, like it has with me, you're gonna have a bruised foot for a while, because they're not that heavy, but they're heavy enough that they hurt. So I hang them on after you do that first cast on row. And you know, there's ways, I'm gonna use the ribber in a second. Everyone has their preferences for their edge. I am gonna redo this a little bit. I don't feel like it grabbed the needles well. So everyone has their preferences for how they cast on. You can cast on directly to both beds of the machine. I happen to really like doing an E-wrap cast on to get started, just because I like how, what you'll see at the end, I like how tight of an edge it creates. So for my machine knitters who have been doing this for a while, I say just cast on whatever way you prefer. I'm definitely the type of knitter who's like, whatever floats your boat. You know, I know with a lot of hand knitters, there's a lot of differences between like if you throw it or if you're a picker. So I'm kind of the mindset, whatever feels best to you and whatever you enjoy the most, that's gravy in my book. So I have enough weight on, and again, this has been through trial and error. I try to distribute them on the ends and then sort of in the middle. Now that's better. See how much of a difference that makes? And so now I'm gonna start to transfer everything to the ribber. Our hats, we like to do a 2x2 ribbing. And so I'm gonna transfer the stitches. Let me push the carriage up. Gotta be kind of careful that you don't throw the ribber out of alignment, because these weights can kind of get in the way, and I don't have hanger plates for them to be able to hang off of. I need to get more of those. So now you have these two, and you want to make sure the tension is at 6 and 6. And then here's the ribber sinker plate, so I connect it to both. Make sure it's on there nice and tight. I've forgotten to do that a couple times. And you make sure the yarn is in there. And here's my favorite tool of anything. Actually, I have another favorite tool, so I have two. So this is a double eyelet transfer tool. Everyone has their preferences, but I feel like I can really get into the zone. So you want to make sure the top two, the edges are going to have two stitches on the knitting machine bed, not the ribber. So I do a 2x2, do all the transfer. I kind of love the click, click, click sound that these tools make. It can be very noisy, so if I'm in production mode, I wear noise canceling headphones or just earplugs because I do want to protect my eardrums. So yeah, while I do this, I can speed it up for y'all. Alrighty, we are ready to go. So here's the stitch counter, and what I figured out, so I like to write out my patterns that I do for all of my hats that we sell, just so that way you can replicate it. That's actually a habit that I got into thanks to my partner, because I used to just knit and like kind of follow whatever my whim was and make a pattern up as I went, but that wasn't really great for replicating. So I've gotten in the habit of writing everything down. He's very digital, so he likes to have all of our patterns on our computer. I am still a little analog, so I write everything down by hand, which, as you'll see, is handy for things like the crown decrease. So I'm going to do 36 rows total, so it's at 2 right now because I've done 2. So I do 36 rows to get right at about 5 inches. And again, you have to figure out your swatch and how many rows it should be for you. So here we go. Awesome. Okay, so now we take this back off and we thank the machine for cooperating with us. I haven't given my machine a name yet, but I suppose I should. I work with it all the time. It's kind of like naming your car, so I'm open to suggestions. So now you transfer everything back, and like I said, you want to be careful, because there's nothing worse than having to start over at this point. I think the thing that's interesting with machine knitting, and I think why people consider it cheating, is that they assume you're kind of just programming something in and not really working on anything that hard. And there's a grain of, I can understand where it comes from, because you definitely, like, look how fast I just did the ribbing. And so if you're hand knitting, even if you're a speed knitter, that's going to take you a few hours. And so when it comes to moving the carriage back and forth, no, it might not be the most challenging thing, but you still have to be thoughtful about it. And I think a lot of the skill comes from understanding how to troubleshoot, how to move everything back and forth, like this transfer, and how to basically understand shaping and using the right weights and the hand manipulation. So there's a lot of work that still goes into it, and I find it really rewarding in kind of a different way than hand knitting, in that there's a lot of challenges and things that you have to learn, and you have to be very thoughtful when, as you'll see with the crown, you're trying to shape something and you're trying to transfer stitches. I can show you, I have a machine that has something called a punch card, so you can create these really cool ferrule patterns or tuck stitch type patterns, and even lace work, or what's called double bed jacquard on standard gauge machines, which are thinner 4.5 millimeter machines. And so there's a lot of capabilities, and it certainly goes faster, but it doesn't negate the skill and the nuance. And I think that's why I enjoy it, is you're able to produce really cool stuff. And yeah, it is a lot quicker, but you still have the gratification of the hand knitting experience. And, you know, I think anything to support slow fashion. Yes, I'm using Lion brand here, but we try to, for all of our hats, we've been switching over to 100% US wool, be that sheep's wool or alpaca, and that's been really great. We have a few different wholesalers that we work with that we can actually get coned yarn from. You know, wool is not the scratchy stuff that your mind might evoke. They have really soft, great quality wool and really beautiful colors that is just so much fun to work with. So we've been transferring all of our yarn that we use and all of our products over to those wholesalers. So by 2023, so within the next month or two, we'll have used up all of our scrap yarn that we formerly used, and we'll be using 100% US wool. So we're excited about that. And getting shipments of wool from two of them that I really like are Jaeger Spun and Brown Sheep. It's like Christmas morning every time a big box of yarn arrives. So, all right, last few stitches. I think the transferring of stitches can sometimes take longer than actually knitting the ribbing, and you'll see that with the crown too. So the bottlenecks are not the actual carriage moving, it's the transferring and the movement of stitches. So we lower this down. Some people have ribber covers, and I need to really invest in one just so that it doesn't have the yarn dust pop onto it. You'll see me wearing masks a lot when I knit with yarn. I'm not today just because I want you to be able to hear me, but I wear a mask just to kind of protect my sinuses, especially when I'm knitting with really fuzzy yarn like alpaca. So I reset my counter back to 0 for the body, and I move my tension up to T7. And so I'm actually going to switch yarn colors and switch over to the blue. So this has been real green. I always rewind my yarn at the end just so that way I don't have a million cakes that are kind of tangled and halfway ready to implode. When it came to designing the body for us, we found that we really liked, like I said, a 5-inch fold over brim, and then the body we do it about 4 3/4 inches, and we found that that gives a nice profile for some of our hats that we put designs on. Here's one of our popular ones that actually has moose antlers done with duplicate stitch, so that's kind of in the way right now, but we like to have features on our designs. This is the glacier hat, and it's inspired by the wildflowers that you see up in Glacier during the spring. So yeah, and our spring is like June, which is most people's summer. Here's a little Tupperware I use to keep the yarn from jumping around. I forgot to use it before. So when you switch colors, there's a way to actually weave in the ends without having to do that at the end. So people are mixed about this. I still double knot my yarn, which some people won't do. And then what you do is you weave it on the back side of the first couple stitches, and voila. So according to this pattern, I'm going to be doing snowflakes, so it requires a little bit of Fair Isle. So actually it's tension 8 because I am doing Fair Isle, so excuse me. When you do Fair Isle, as any hand knitter knows, you want to kind of give a little bit more stitches or use bigger needles to help with some of the tightness that comes with Fair Isle. So this is actually at tension 8. So this is about 25 rows total of stitch work that I'm going to be doing that will require some Snow White yarn too, because I'm creating snowflake effect. So put that through the second color area and put that on hold for the first row. So this is going to be about 25 rows, and to start with, everything is transferred. The stitches, the ends are here, so that's ready to go. So the first row for this one is just a plain knit. So these can be snipped, and you don't have to spend time afterwards weaving them in. These are like These are my favorite scissors. They were just they were part of a Singer set. I have a bigger set of scissors that I use to cut pom-poms. And if you're any type of crafter, you know how protective you are of your good scissors, and make sure that nobody uses them for things like paper or, God forbid, food, because you need them sharp for cutting stuff. So the first row is done. The next row is actually ferrule. And so to do ferrule on the machine, you need, again, this little guy to select needles. So this is for selecting all of them. This is for selecting every other needle. And so you want to take your machine, you have the option for a Titexma, it's on plane normally, and you move it to part. And so that allows you to make sure that you're working only the needles that are selected. And so it's blue and white, so every other needle is going to be selected to start. So you pull them out like that into E. And so this is now going to only work the needles that have been pulled out. So for this one, you actually pull this lever up on the Titexma, just so that way it doesn't trigger the stitch counter, because you're gonna actually have to knit every other row twice in order for it to count once. So what I mean by that is I've done all of the blue stitches for that row. Now I need to do all of the white stitches. So here's the white. So I did the first one every other, and then now I started with the second one and I'm doing every other. So pull those all out to E. And when it comes to holding yarn that's not in work, I tend to just kind of hang it wherever is convenient. For this yarn, weave it through, tie it. This part's a little harder to add the yarn, I've noticed, so I tend to actually just weave it in after. So again, so this is the second time around. So now you have, that was one row. And I have to get it back here to get the blue again, because the next row is a plain knit. And so since it's in part, it's actually not going to work any of the needles because they're not in position E. Be very careful to make sure it's in part, because if you put it back to plain and you run it over, the whole thing is going to drop off, and that is very heartbreaking, and I've done it a million times. And yeah, so just continue to be mindful. So put it back here, hang this guy right there, and then now put it to part and work that. So now for row 3, it's a plain knit. You want to make sure, sometimes you need to readjust the tension if you pulled it out. So just double check on that. Straight across. And now for this row, when you do the selection, the B or the blue is going to be the opposite. So this is just my particular pattern for snowflakes, and I can show you what it looks like at the end. Part. Now I do the same thing with the white. And so you repeat that until you get to row 8, or till after you've finished row 18. So I've done 18 rows in the ferrule design that I want to. And so this is when I switch my tension back to 7, which is the tension that I like to knit this yarn at when it's just a plain knit. I switch it back to 7, and I weave in these ends. And so I do 6 more rows in just a plain knit, and then we get to the crown, which is my favorite part. And I'm excited to share it with you because it took me a lot of workshopping to figure out. And I will say, it's a lot easier for me to do it on this particular machine than it is, for example, my bulky, and I'll talk about why in just a second. So nice and secured. So those are tight It'll be nice and invisible for the back end. Actually, I'm gonna do 26 rows for this one just to make it easier. So this brings us to the crown. Here's the thing with this. So everyone has to make notes for this one in a way that's gonna make sense to them. So the way I think about this is if I'm doing an 88 stitch hat on hand, I like to do a 4-corner decrease, which is typically you knit 18 stitches and then you do a slip knit for a left slanting decrease and a knit 2 together for a right slanting decrease. So that's how you get those pretty V's going right up or that you get that V-type shape from the 4 corners going up to the top. And so when I first started machine knitting, I love scrunching a bunch of stitches together, and it's certainly possible to do that. Some of our hats we do, but I wanted to have that sloping dome type look that comes with a nice 4-corner decrease. So to do that, again, I think about this in terms of the fact that I have 88 stitches that I have to account for, and these end 2 stitches, I kind of ignore them when I'm doing all the math. My partner, he likes to write out the stitches he needs to transfer with those included. So you should take the approach that's right for you. So to just walk through that, one, I reset it back to 0, and I'm gonna do 16 rows total for the decrease. So every odd row is gonna be the decrease, and you run the carriage over twice. So to do the math for that, here's my little worksheet, and I will include my notes in the comment section. So if I talk too fast or you have questions, just leave me a note in the comments and I can explain it better. This is my first how-to video, so I'm still getting used to how to explain things best. So I thank you for your patience. I plan to do a lot more machine knitting and hand knitting tutorials, especially for people interested in converting patterns between the two or just understanding what the heck these machines are. So yeah, like and subscribe if you haven't. That way I can continue to bring you this type of content and provide free training, because that's how I learned. So again, if we're thinking about 88, like I said, you'd knit 18 stitches and then you do a slip knit and a knit 2 together. So for this one, I want to have the 2 end stitches right in the center of a quarter. So you can't see it here, but there's this nice little seam in the set going down the center, and that's these 2 stitches that I mattress stitched together. So when I was figuring this out, I knew that I wanted to put the stitches that would be invisible in the center so that the seam sits in the back. Here's our little logo button, which is a bear. We live in grizzly habitat and we are grateful for that. So we are Bears Den Essentials. And as you can see, here's like a close-up. It's still kind of hard to tell, but you have a really nice clean decrease and you can't even see the seam on the outside. And because we use really soft yarn, you can't really feel it either. So instead of starting at counting like 18 across and then transferring your 2 sets of stitches total there, I divide 18 by 2. So 18 by 2 divided by 2 is 9. And so that way I'm starting my decreases in a way that would put the ends at the center of a quarter. So I count 9 stitches over. So ignoring the end stitch, again, if you're my partner and this makes more sense to you, he starts including that. So it's 9 plus 1 end stitch. So for me, I just am like, okay, I know I'm not using the end stitch, so I'm just gonna skip over that. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is where I take my transfer tool and I transfer the first stitch. In order to create a left slanting decrease like slip knit, I transfer the 10th stitch from the right to the left. So this stitch doesn't have any, or this needle doesn't have any stitches on it. So what this looks like close up is the 10th stitch for the slip knit has been transferred to the 11th stitch, and the 13th stitch has been transferred to the 12th. So as you can see, I've actually done all of the math here. And so I have my little note, not counting the end stitch. So I know which stitches I have to transfer where. So I've counted over 9 for the first one, and then you have the slip knit and the knit 2 together. But now I want to do a full quarter. So you count 18 across. So one, it's hard to hold my phone and count at the same time. So I appreciate your patience on this while I get more materials to be able to hold it without having to, or have something else hold it. So I've counted 18, and then it's the 19th stitch that I'm going to do again, transferred from right to left, and then for the knit 2 together, transfer here. There we go. So I continue to do that again 2 more times. So I know that I need I just did stitch number 32 onto 33 and stitch 35 onto 34. Now I need to count over to stitch number 54, again, not counting the end stitch, and I'm going to transfer that onto 55. And then next, I'm going to transfer 57 to 56. So I've just transferred 35 to 34, so now I'm going to do 36, 37, 38. So that's 18. So again, now on the 19th stitch, I'm going to transfer right to left and then left to right. So one more time to the end. So 57, that was 57, so that was 18. So here's 76. Transfer here. And you can double check your work by making sure you have, not including the end stitch, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that way you're going to have the equidistance between all 4 quarters. So that's kind of a helpful way to get started. And you're going to repeat this whenever I am doing a crown. I take whatever stitch number, and this is going to be 8 stitches decreased every other row. So I like to do all my math right up front so that every other row I know exactly which stitches to count that I need to be decreasing on. As you'll see, you can actually kind of start to eyeball it. You'll see where the bumps are, so you just know to transfer the stitches onto those bumps. But sometimes, especially with fuzzier yarn or darker yarn, it can be hard to see. So I will include the math that I used for all of this in the comment section. But I do think when you're starting out, it's helpful to map out. I do 16 rounds of decrease total, because then you end up with 24 stitches at the end, which gives you a nice, it doesn't give you too pointy of an end, but it's really nice to thread together and give you a simple number of stitches to thread your needle through and cinch, as opposed to just casting off all of them and cinching it really tight. So you want to do the math the same way I was talking about. So however many stitches you have when you're at 88, you're going to be doing quarters of 22. And 4 of those stitches are going to be taken up by the 2 types of decreases. And so when you get to 80, for example, you're going to have 20 stitches you need to work with, and 4 of those are going to be taken up by decrease. So you need to do it based on 16. So instead of 18 divided by 2 and counting across 9 stitches at first, you're going to be counting across 8. And then in these in-between parts, you're going to be counting across 16. Next one is going to be 14 divided by 2, so 7, 14, and so on. And so then it'll be 12, 6 and 6, 12 in this part, and then so on to the end. And so if that's confusing to you, I'm going to write this all out. Trust me, it's a lot easier once you start to do it. And if you've ever done any sort of hand knit crown, you kind of know what I'm talking about. The biggest thing is just to remember that everything is shifted over so that the end, like the start and the finish, are in the middle of a quarter to account for these two end stitches. Now we have to actually transfer everything over, and this brings me to my second favorite tool. I found this on Etsy, and it's a 10-prong needle transfer tool. If you're just starting out, it's really nice to have a 3-prong because transferring stitches, I don't know, it can be such a finicky thing. So you gotta kind of get used to it. And definitely when I was first learning how to build this crown, I've dropped stitches in the process of transferring. So it's almost like a hand-eye skill that you have to get used to and you have to get practice with. You can get faster at it, but again, if you get too fast, that's when you drop stitches. So you want to eventually bring all of the stitches in. So I do this half first and then I do this half, and this is where it can take the most time on a crown instead of just running it across. I like to transfer all my stitches in 10 at a time. So you carefully move all of the needles, or move the stitches on all the needles. Obviously it gets faster and faster the fewer stitches you have, but again, while this is a more time-consuming type of crown, I've found that the aesthetic people really seem to like, and I really like it too. So there. So finish that. And you see, I mean, this is nice for if you're just transferring like 2 or 3 stitches at a time. It's a lot more manageable to move the yarn. And even I feel like when I'm using a garter bar or a bigger transfer tool on my bulky or the standard gauge machine, I still struggle with the mechanics of it. So I've just had the most practice on this one. But again, this is my favorite tool. It came in a kit of, I think, like 4. There's a 10, a 9, an 8, and a 7. So yeah, Etsy, look for 10-prong transfer tool for knitting machines, 6mm, and this is it, or whatever size your machine is. So yeah, so now I do this side, and it's easiest to work from the outside in because if you try to transfer all the stitches in here first, you end up having a little bit of a gap. And you know, for me, if I have more than 2 or 3 needles out of work, it makes the yarn pull and it makes transferring harder for me, and I'm more likely to drop stitches. So I always work from the outside in. And there's that nice click again. Get all of it pulled out. So you take the needles from B to E, and then you carefully make sure all the yarn is transferred and you push them back. I use both hands to do that. That's just to make sure I have good control over everything. Like I said, it takes a lot of practice to just get comfortable with it, so it's kind of like anything else. So all of the needles are now with yarn on it. So instead of 90, I now have 82 stitches total, including these 2 ends. And I'm gonna knit over it. So that was technically the decrease row. And then now here's a plain knit row. And I start on the next round of decreases. So as I was mentioning with the math, I did this before I got started. Like I said, I'm analog, so you can see my chicken scratch, and I obviously don't space the writing out evenly because I'm the kid who used to write happy birthday, but the DAY was always really scrunched on cards. So clearly knitting is my forte, not drawing and writing. For this one, here's the math. So these are the stitches that I'm going to be transferring based on quarters of 20. Again, ignoring that end, I start and I count 8 because I'm going to have 4 of those 20 decreased every single round. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. So I'm going to count 8 stitches. So the 8th stitch, as you can see, that works out perfectly because here's where that bump is. It's kind of hard to tell here, but I can see where the bump is from the decrease of the previous round. And so I know these are the needles that I'm going to be transferring onto. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. So now I'm going to do my left slanting decrease, transfer the needle or the yarn onto that needle, my right slanting decrease, and I'm going to repeat. So I'm going to count 16. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'm going to double check. Yep, there's that bump. And so left slant decrease, right slant decrease. And I always also feel underneath to just double check. I've definitely counted wrong before, and I end up redoing the whole hat because the crown has this kind of like weird zigzag. So you do want to double check your counting, especially if you're tired and starting to get a little cross-eyed. So 16 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Alrighty. So the next two are going to be decreased. So there's the stitches we're decreasing onto. And that goes along with the math. So this is stitch number 49, and I'm transferring it onto stitch 50. This is stitch 52, transferring it to 51. Another 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Sure enough, there's that bump. So this stitch is going to go right to left, left to right, double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're good. Now we do the transfer inwards. Sometimes, so you want these needles up when you're transferring just to make your life easier and you don't drop stitches. I actually will sometimes keep a magnet handy because that way you can pull these guys open. I've seen people who have 3D printed a little thing that flips these over, because if you use your fingernails it can start to hurt after a while. So transfer the stitches in. It can feel really slow and cumbersome, especially if you're using the 3-prong transfer tool to move all your stitches in. But again, I think the end result and digging it out for the learning curve is really worthwhile. I love the aesthetic of our crowns that we use for our hat. All right, so 2 more rows. And so now we have 74 stitches total left. And for this one, we have 18 stitches total per quarter, and 4 of those are going to be for the decrease. So we're going to then go based upon 7 for the first part and decrease stitch 8 to 9 and 11 to 10. And then for the other 3, we're going to do distances of 14 stitches. So hopefully the math is starting to make a little bit more sense as we go. So 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is a stitch I'm going to transfer. Stitch 8 to stitch 9 and stitch 11 to 10. And you start to feel that bump get thicker and thicker. So that's confirming that. So now I'm going to count 14. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So here's our first decrease for this one. Whoop. So there we go. There we go. Another 14. 14. So here's the first decrease. Just double check with the bumps. Yep. And then final 14. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Alrighty. So here the stitch is going to go here. Right to left, left to right. Double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We are good. Sometimes that'll happen, it'll slip off. So you want to make sure when you're using that, you have all of the needles engaged before you push back and take them off, because then if the yarn falls off, it's going to just have one stitch just go all the way down to the bottom, and It's possible to fix that, but definitely challenging, and if you're me, it always looks a little herky-jerky, so I try to avoid that. 2 more. So now we have 66 stitches left and 64 stitches that we're going to be doing our calculation based on. So 64 divided by 4 is 16, and so that means 4 of the stitches will be in work, 12 of them are going to be what's knitted in between. So for the first one, we want to count 6, so 12 divided by 2, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then that 7th stitch going to go to the 8th one, and the 10th stitch going to go to the 9th. Double check that bump, yep. And so now we're going to count 12 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that 13th stitch, which is stitch number 23, going to go into 24. Stitch number 26, going to go into number 25. Another 12. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 13th stitch, which is stitch number 39, onto 40. Stitch number 42 onto stitch 41. Another 12. 3, 6. I like to count in threes. 9, 12. So this 13th stitch, I'm going to push it out. Double check to make sure it's correct with that bump, and then count 6, not including the end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we are good. So now I transfer all the stitches in. And if you find that you get this tool and you want to just start practicing with it before you do an entire hat, and then you try it and it falls off, because that's how I learned, is I would do an entire hat and then I would try to practice with this thing, and it made me very frustrated and upset because I didn't have the mechanics of this quite down yet. So instead of doing it on a hat that's like 90% finished, cast on a few and then practice with your own math in terms of transferring the stitches in. That way you can just get comfortable with working this, and the motor skills that you need to kind of create that muscle memory with. That's just my thoughts on avoiding frustration, and I say that as someone who is really stubborn about doing swatch gauges, and I'll just start knitting and then adjust it and redo it, which I would save myself a lot of time if I was just consistent. So all the stitches are transferred. 1, 2. So that's what I was kind of saying about with the knitting. Like, the actual moving the carriage back and forth is really fast. It's the transferring and that upfront math that you need to kind of take your time with that takes up the most time. So we're halfway done. I'll talk through the math, but you can actually start to feel the bumps and just push the stitches out. I reach around and you can feel where they are. And so you know what the stitches are that you're going to be transferring onto, which is kind of cheating, but once you've done it a couple times, then you can just double check yourself. So we have 58 stitches left total, including the end stitches, and we're going to be doing it based on 56 that are going to be for the calculations. So 56 divided by 4 is 14. 4 of those stitches are going to be for the decreases. So that means we're going to be doing it based on 10. So 10 in between these and 5 in between the end and your first transferred stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next stitch you're going to transfer onto this right to left. That stitch, there we go, left to right. Now we'll do 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Next stitch, transfer, right to left for slip, slip, knit, left to right for knit 2 together. And I will make a comment. It looks a little bit different than when you do it by hand, and I mean that in a good way. It's actually very clean looking when you do it by machine, and that just might be the fact that you're going to get really consistent tension. So I like the aesthetic of a machine knit crown a lot because the decrease has such clear, crisp edges that you'll see in just a second. So continue 10 across. This is number 11 onto 12. And then we're gonna put that here. And when I say 11 onto 12, if we're doing it based on total, this is stitch 34 onto 35. So I don't want to confuse anybody. And this is stitch 37 onto 36. So we're gonna count 10 more. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so now we're gonna transfer stitch 48 onto 49 and 51 onto 50. So double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so after I knit these 2 rows, I'm gonna take 2 of the weights off because the yarn or the piece starts to get a little bit too much for the yarn for so few stitches. So I like to take the 2 center weights off once I hit 50 stitches left, which we'll be left with after this row. So in total, including the end stitches. So transfer everything in. Part of why it's important to make sure you get your tension right, like if you try to use yarn that's too big or you don't have the tension right on it, can actually make transferring from the needles to the transfer tool really hard and more likely to drop off. So that's why I know I was just kind of ragging on not liking gauge swatches, but they are really darn useful for all the other stuff you got to do. I know I took the weights off before I did the 2 stitches or the 2 rows. It's fine. Usually I take them off after. So we have 6 more rows total left. So 3 more rounds of decreases. It gets much faster. For this one, you can feel them and you can eyeball them. You see the bumps nice and clearly. So just double check. We have 50 stitches total, 48 that we're going to be working on. So 48 divided by 4 is 12. So 4 of those are going to be for decreases. That means 8 is the knitted stitches in between each round of decrease. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Next stitch is a decrease, which is stitch number 5 onto 6, and then stitch 8 onto 7. Now we're going to do 8 in between. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So next stitch, stitch number 17, we're going to transfer onto 18. And stitch 20 onto 19, another 8, 6, 7, 8. So stitch number 29 onto stitch 30, and stitch 32 onto 31, another 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Stitch number 41 onto 42, 44 onto 43, double check, 4 stitches. Now we transfer. And sometimes as it gets a little bit thinner like this, I might use just the 3-prong side of this transfer tool. Totally up to you. I find that if I try to use the 10-prong, sometimes I don't control the stitches as well when there's fewer on there, so that's kind of my logic there. Like I said, I have 3 others like this that have a couple fewer prongs, but I find that the 10-prong and the 3-prong are really the ones that I use the most, so they're the ones that are closest in my little box of goodies over there. I think you can find transfer tools on eBay as well. I just have more familiarity with buying and selling stuff on Etsy, but I get some of my sponge bars off of eBay, and you just have to kind of learn where to look when it comes to getting materials for your machines. This is a machine that's still in production. I bought it through All Brands, but my 2 others are brother machines that are actually, and the motor drives, they've all been discontinued from like the early 90s, maybe even the late 80s, so they're about as old as I am, and they've just been refurbished. So finding parts for them can sometimes be tricky because it usually means looking over in the UK or looking for people who have 3D printers or who have machines that they've just scrapped for parts. So 2 more. We have 42 stitches left total, and we're going to be working with 40. So 40 divided by 4 is 10. 4 of those are going to be in work. That means we're going to have 6 in between, and so we want to count 3. So it's getting tight. So just 1, 2, 3, stitch 4 onto stitch 5, 7 onto 6, and then we're gonna do another 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Stitch 14 onto 15, stitch 17 onto 16, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Stitch number 24, sorry, my math was off for a second, onto 25, stitch 27 onto 26, another 6, and then we're gonna have stitch number 34 onto 35, and stitch 37 onto 36, double check, 3 and an end, so we're good. I get all stoked towards the end like this because it's like, it just moves so much more quickly and you just are in that kind of transfer flow state. Maybe I'm the only one who feels that way, but I certainly enjoy getting close to the end. And you can see the crown shaping start to happen. It's kind of hard to tell from this perspective, but I'll show you what it looks like after. So we are on the last round. I want to just make sure that guy's tight enough because he's a little loose. Finally, we have 34 stitches total, and we want to be having 32 in work. So 32 divided by 4 is 8. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. So we just want to 1, 2. So stitch number 3 onto stitch number 4, stitch number 6 onto 5, and then we do 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We do stitch 11 onto 12 and 14 onto 13. Another 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Stitch 19 onto 20 and stitch 22 into stitch 21. Another 4. Last but not least, stitch 27 onto 28, 30 onto 29. Double check, 2 and the end stitch. And actually, here, case in point, I'm just going to use this guy and move these in. Still nice and quick because there's only 2 transfers. There we go. Do the same for this side. It's easy to manipulate and maneuver. And then wrap it up. Put that over here. Awesome. Alrighty, last 2 rows. Et voila. So I'm just gonna take this off. I cut the yarn. I kind of like to gently let that go. And just get a nice jumbo darning needle. I take the weights off for this just to, again, prevent them from falling on my foot if I forget. And then I take the claw hanger off. So careful not to snag anything on the way off. So this guy. And then I push, probably should have done this first. You push all the needles out into E. And then I just take it off. So what you've got is a flat piece with 4 perfectly even decreases. And when you seam it all up, it's gonna look just like a regular old hat, and you won't have any sort of visibility of the seam unless you flip it inside out. And you can now see the Fair Isle pattern that I did too for the snowflakes, and the brim is about 5 inches, and it's gonna be folded over like this. So you get a really nice shaped hat that fits an average adult size head when you do worsted yarn at about 88 stitches and 2 extra, so 90 with the stitches that you'll edge or do the mattress stitch with. Here's that nice crisp decrease that I was talking about. I think it looks really aesthetically pleasing, and especially when you have more of a busy design happening in the body, I like the simplicity of the crown, and it prevents you from having too pointy of an end or too scrunched up of an end, so to use technical terminology. So yeah, thank you for joining me for my first how-to. I look forward to sharing all of my hand knitting and machine knitting adventures with you. So thanks again, and if you have any interest in buying some of our finished knits, go to bearsdenessentials.com, and we also offer patterns on our blog, including some free ones. So keep your eyes peeled if you're a fellow knitter or a person in need of some warm knits. So after I did the mattress stitch, you can actually see what the hat looks like all finished. And you can see how there's that nice neat decrease that's perfectly even. And you have it evenly spaced across all four corners. And it has a nice top to it, which I think is nice and symmetrical. And it looks really sleek and svelte to me. And I'm guessing you can't actually tell where the seam is, but you can, again, when you flip it inside out. I used the mattress stitch, which I can show y'all in another video, as I mentioned. What it looks like, then it gives you a really perfectly symmetrical top that's not too much slouch, but enough slouch that you can feel like your head has some room to it. We can also, some of our hats we do a little bit tighter so that the crown sits right flush against the head. I happen to like having them sit with a little bit of space and slouch. So it's totally your preference, but the crown itself gives that nice rounded top to it. And if you want to make it even more snug, as you can see, it fits nice and neatly and close to the head in a comfortable way. And I think it looks pretty cool. This is something that you can make identical using hand knitting. And so what's fun is it kind of opens up the possibilities if you're trying to do production knitting. And if you're struggling with things like arthritis and your wrists are sore, but you still want to be able to create stuff, this is a machine knit hat version that looks a lot like hand knitting. So thanks again.